Hey, thank you all for joining us. Jackie was talking about how we really have, need to worry about how much we've been dealing with, ecological issues and trying to get all the rainfall and make sure that we can actually grow some of the stuff that we've got. Joe was talking about how much rain we get and that sort of stuff and how to capture that. So, for those that don't use just rainwater capture, I'm here to talk about what we need to do to actually irrigate all of our different types of beds that we're going to talk about. So, I'm going to talk about why we need water very briefly, because that's been covered fairly well. I'm going to talk about where we're going to be getting our water. Now, some of this was with Joe, but it was talked a lot about, what resources we're getting it from, which was kind of a neat thing. It's not one that we normally cover, so that's kind of a cool thing. Then we're going to talk about what we're trying to water, okay, and then how we're going to actually water those various different beds. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about drip irrigation and some of the specifics that we need to do while doing drip. So, we live in a desert, almost. You go 50, 60 miles to the west of here, and you could almost consider yourself into the actual desert areas. Midland, it's 150 miles west of here, gets about 13 inches of rainfall. So they're full desert for us. We're not too far behind them though. Our years can vary pretty well. We'll have years that we get 13 inches of rain, but we'll also have other years that we'll get 45 or 50 inches. So it's very hit or miss on what we're going to get. Now, what Joe was talking about, that little site where you can go see where the different amounts of water that you're going to get. If you look at it, there's a nice dark tannish line right through the center of the country. That's the 100th meridian. That's basically where the wet-dry line is for the country. It's kind of an interesting little fact. But the further east you go and the further south you go, the wetter you get. Unfortunately, we're in that dry section. So, now, where are we getting the water? Most of us, if we're living in town, or even if we're living in some of the outlying areas, a lot of times if we're connected to a city water system, we're actually getting our water from the city of Abilene. I'm connected to the Potosi water system. We buy our water from the city of Abilene. Eula water system buys it from the city of Abilene. I know there's several other local, smaller community areas that have little water supply systems. All they do is just buy the water from Abilene and sell it off to the local community. So it's kind of one of those things of if you're looking for where you're getting the water, more than likely if you're connected to a water meter, it's going to come from the city of Abilene's system. So, wells. Joe was talking about wells doing well, at least in southwest Abilene. I've heard just the opposite. I'm a little bit east of Abilene, so they talk about if you drill a well there, you've got about a 1 in 4 chance of hitting water at all. And so, yeah, that's not a good, not because of what a well running. So, wells are probably not a real good bet around here unless you know you've got a good water source nearby. So if you're like in a creek valley or something like that, you might be able to get some water from a well, but probably not. Rainwater collection, Joe was talking about. Rainwater collection can work really well. There is a group of homes between Hawley and Anson, I believe. There used to be a water pipe going between those two cities that one of the cities was buying water from the other one. I can't remember which way it was going. But they kept having problems with that water pipe, and so the other city decided, well, we're not going to buy water from you anymore. We're going to, do something else. And so they cut that water pipe off. Well, that whole section of pipe that people were tapped into between the two cities suddenly didn't have a water source. That whole section of houses now runs 100% off of rainwater because they didn't have a choice. So it does work very well for actually living off of rainwater collection if you have the correct systems in place. And you can always rely on Mother Nature. Joe was talking about her 2.5 inches of rain that she's gotten in the last week. I've gotten 7 inches of rainfall down at my house in the last week. So it's called an issue at that point. I was walking through water 8 inches deep across my driveway. So it was not a good thing. So, what are we watering? Well, if you're like my neighbor down the street, this is what your front yard looks like. He's an avid golfer. He keeps his front yard looking like a fairway. It's mowed at a 1/2 inch tall, and it is green year-round. It is gorgeous, but I do not want to see what his water bill is, because it has got to be atrocious, especially with that low height mow on the grass. Okay? You can do something like this. This is just a bunch of flowers put into a flower bed. Just to let you know, this type of landscaping compared to that is about 1/4 of the water to use, and it looks nice and pretty. So it's one of those things we need to see what we're actually trying to water.
Yeah, you go.
Now, if we're now, I would not recommend this type of landscaping in Abilene. Okay, this works well in Midland and further west, where they don't get nearly the water that we do. The problem that you'll run into with these, there's two folds, especially when we're talking earth kind landscaping. One, all of that decomposed granite and concrete in your front yard will end up absorbing heat during the summer and then re-radiating it during the night onto your house. So your air conditioning unit never gets a break during the summer. Okay, so that can be a real drag on your energy bills. Second option, and problem that we run into with these, is during the spring, last 6 weeks, how windy was it? Blowing all that dust? Well, it wasn't just blowing dust, it was blowing in weed seeds. And now we've had lots of rain. And so a yard like this in our area, ends up becoming a weeding nightmare forever. You just cannot get rid of the weeds. So it's not a fun place to have. So I do not recommend this at all. Or you can do my method. Now this isn't my house, but it's kind of the same general principle of what I do. I pick select areas in my landscape, and that's what I water on. I do not water the yard. I do not water the trees for the most part. If it cannot survive in our natural environment, I don't water it. I'm lazy. I don't like to mow. I'm cheap. I don't like to waste water on things like, grass. Now, trees I don't mind watering a little bit, but I try and get those that can actually survive in our local landscapes. Now, when we're looking at our general, what we're doing for a landscape, this is usually what most people are looking at. If you're looking at something, either the far north side of town or far south side of town, you're up in here with the newer subdivisions. If you've been around in one of the older subdivisions, you may be one of the other pictures. And the thing is, when they do a typical subdivision install, they're looking at it as, what's the cheapest way I can landscape this plot and get away with it, and the homeowners will be happy with it. Well, what does that mean? That means sod. So you've got an area, big field of grass. Whether or not that's the best thing in the world, doesn't matter. That's what's cheap, that's what's easy. You'll also get your 1 5-gallon tree planted in there, and anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen number 1 gallon landscape plants. Usually not selected to actually grow in our area, just selected by what was cheap at the big box stores that week. So if you're lucky and you live in one of the older neighborhoods, they actually watered the trees because they probably weren't selected for our area. They've been able to keep everything growing, and so you might actually get a little bit of shade from that one tree, but usually most of those landscape plants have died out, and you've got, this is kind of what you end up with every year. It's a very same looking street. The one tree in the front, a little bit of grass, very little lit in the way of flowers or anything. Yeah, kind of bland, but So it doesn't take much though, with a little bit of planning, to go ahead and just add in a little bit of color. It makes your house stand out quite a bit from everybody else's. So if you're thinking curb appeal for like reselling your house, this actually helps quite a bit because it'll make your house pop out from everybody else's. But it's also, like I said, it's about 1/4 to 1/3 of the water usage for those landscape beds. If you have kids that are now grown, you don't need the play area in your backyard, a lot of times you can go ahead and pull out your turf and go ahead and swap it out with something to make a nice little oasis in your backyard, where it cuts down a lot of the water usage that you're going to need for the lawn, and you can do a lot more interesting plants back there. So that's something to think about. Now, this is my yard. This is a rose bush. Now, as master gardeners, we usually do not recommend rose bushes because of rose rosette disease. Can come in and wipe out your roses. But I love roses, so I go ahead and I plant roses in my yard. Now, I try and pick the very hardy earth kind style roses. There's actually a couple of varieties that they consider earth kind. They require very little maintenance. I sent this picture to a friend of mine who's the one that actually bought this for me. And she was like, "Oh, you're tending it so nicely." And I'm like, "No, I'm not." Remember, I'm lazy and cheap. I water this maybe every other week, and that's all I ever do to this rose bush. I don't spray it for bugs. I don't prune it back. And all I do is just keep mulch on it and water it occasionally. And it is beautiful. Right now, it is absolutely gorgeous. It's not quite as gorgeous this week because between all the hailstorms and the rain, it took a bit of a beating, but it is still pretty. A little bit further down, so this is taken early part of the year, probably about, would have been probably like a late March, early March type time frame. You can see these little plants starting to grow up. Well, this whole area right here becomes this in the spring. Okay, these are lantanas. They take almost no water for this area. Okay, so I do very minimal watering. I end up with beautiful flowers. This flower bed, as you walk by it in the all summer long, is buzzing with bees.
What type of lantana is that one?
This one specifically is called confetti. It was supposed to be 3 feet tall and about a 4-foot diameter plant. So when I made my plan out, I was like, okay, I need this many of them, and I need to put them here so that they fit the bed correctly. Full summer, these things are 5 feet tall and about 8 feet across. They love it right there. Just a little bit of water, and that's all it takes for them. A little bit further down the bed, I've got a bunch of Turk's cap, some Flamacanthus, some Coreopsis, which is now dead. I free range my chickens, so unless the plant is large, the chickens have a tendency to destroy about 1/3 of my landscape without too much effort. A little bit further down that bed, there's those Turk's cap. You'll see some Greg's Blue Mist, or what we call butterfly crack. Come June and July, those things are completely covered in monarchs, queens, and all sorts of other butterflies. They are just, everything loves them. Yes, ma'am?
Repeat the name of that plant again.
Greg's Blue Mist. Wonderful plant for around here. It does spread fairly well. This started off as 3 plants right in here 2 years before this picture was taken. So it's creeping its way out, but I don't have a problem because they're gorgeous. Or you can do my zero water section. I've got a section of my property right out by the street. I was getting tired of mowing this because it was about 4 passes with the mower and it's on the far end of the yard. I'm like, I don't want to deal with this. Year before last, I dropped about 2 pounds of wildflower seeds. And I don't have to take care of that yard anymore. Now, I figured out this year that I actually need to go in about January and mow it once, just to kind of drop all the dead stuff back. Because it's looking a little ratty right now. But it is absolutely gorgeous. Right now, I've got the showy primrose, the big pink flowers you see in the bar ditches all over the place. This thing is just all solid pink, and then I've got bachelor buttons popping up with blues, purples, pinks coming up through it. I've got what else do I have in there? I've got wine cup and some other stuff that's all popping up and starting to bloom right now. Absolutely gorgeous. I don't have to touch this area at all with water or mowing, except for, like I said, I need to do it once a year. So, when we're looking at watering, what are we actually watering? We kind of break it down into about 5 different categories. Our lawn area is kind of a separate area because we kind of have to fuss with that specifically. We've got trees, which can sometimes be taken care of at the same time that we're watering our lawns. Our flower beds, any water features that we may have, fountains, that sort of stuff. And then our vegetable garden is completely different than everything else because it's designed not to look pretty, it's designed to give us food. And so we have to kind of deal with that a little bit separately. Now, when we're talking about lawns, it's not how we're watering it so much, but how much we're going to have to water it. Okay? A lot of this will come down to selection of the variety of grass we're growing. As Master Gardeners for this area, we're recommending either a Bermuda grass variety, either, it doesn't have to be a hybrid or the common, either one will work. A zoysia grass will work very well in our area. It's also very low maintenance, very low water. Or if you have an area that, especially if you've got a larger lot, buffalo grass works very well for an area that you don't want to have to maintain. It's a short grass, naturally growing. The idea behind buffalo grass is you plant it, throw the seed out and ignore it. Literally ignore it. You don't want to mow it, you don't want to water it, you don't want to fertilize it. It's just a natural range grass for here. So if you've got a larger area that you want to deal with, a lot of times that buffalo grass will work well. The only problem with buffalo grass, it is a clump grass, so it's, from a distance it looks beautiful. Walking up onto it may not look quite as pretty. So, weather can play an important part of how much we're going to have to water our yard. Springtime, when it's dry, we may have to water a little more. Dead of summer, we're going to have to be watering some extra just because we're losing so much to the heat. But especially in the shoulder seasons, now till about mid-June, we really shouldn't have to water anything extraordinary. Just the normal amount we're looking for that particular grass variety. The other option is in the winter. For the most part, we don't have to water our yard in the winter, but that only takes place if we get a little bit of moisture during the winter. If we've had a drought winter where we're not getting any moisture, we may want to still add a little bit of water into our soils just to make sure that the grass, especially things like Bermuda and stuff, the root crowns underneath the ground don't dry out too much and die off. Otherwise, you're going to have to restart with a new yard the next year. If you're in, if your yard gets a little bit of shade during the day, it may not need quite as much water. So that may be something to think about. Now, I always hear people talk about, I've got, a couple of pecan trees that shade off this section of the yard. What grass will grow there? None. Heavy shade and grass do not work well together. Plain and simple. St. Augustine will take some shade, but St. Augustine takes more water, and it is also prone to various fungal issues and some other issues that make it not as good of a grass for our area, if at all possible. But in general,
Buffalo grass you're talking about, is that like a mound grass? It grows like in mounds?
it's not really like a mound.
I mean a little.
It's what they call a tuft grass. So it's a tuft it'll be a bunch of little tufts right next to each other.
Yeah,
So-
hard on the lawnmower and everything.
Yeah, but like I said, this is for areas that's further out that you really don't, if you've got like a large lawn and you don't want to have to deal with the back third of your property or something, it works well for that because you don't mow it or anything else. It's just, it grows to 6 inches in height and that's it. So, but usually what we're looking for is about 1 inch of rainfall a week is what most of the grass is to produce a very good, high quality grass and making it nice and pretty. Okay? Now, this is kind of one of those things when we talk about how much we actually spend on water for a particular yard. Average yard in Abilene really hasn't, the size of the lots really haven't changed in about the last 50 years. They're all about 65 by 100 and, what, 110, 125, which is about 0.2 acres, about 8,300 square feet. Okay? On this lot that they have sodded off for you, figure you've got a house in there, you've got a garage, driveways, some sidewalks, that sort of stuff. But you're looking at just under 5,000 square feet of, like I said, probably sod in your yard. Okay? You water that 1 inch a week, and that's about 12,000 gallons of water per month to water that lawn and keep it looking okay. All right? So that's a lot of water just to make your grass look pretty. So how can we cut that down? Well, a lot of that's going to be, selection of the grass and then looking at trying to maybe reduce that turf to no more than 1/3 of your landscaping and preferably less. If you can get away with less, that's good. Now, when you're talking about watering the lawn, there's various ways that you can go ahead and water. Now, if we're looking at like a manual version of watering, okay, when I say manual, this is not an automatic timer or anything like that, or a natural sprinkler system set in. They've got various varieties of sprinklers that you can use. I call these the little fan ones. They work reasonably well. They run about 65 to 70% efficiency. They've got a big enough water drop that they don't evaporate too much. The problem is that they shoot it up 30 feet in the air and let it come down. So it's up in the air a long time. And so while it's up in the air, the wind can take care of it and move that fan from where you want it over into your driveway. And like Jackie says, no matter how much you water concrete, it doesn't grow. So you don't want it to do that. Well, it also evaporates some, so it's one of those things we want to try and avoid those as much as possible. You've got the little round sprinkler things that we have like on the right. Works well. The problem is it gives a circle. Most lawns are square. And so you'll end up with corners that are either not getting watered or you're having to cover it in such a way that you're sprinkling onto your hardscapes like your sidewalks or your driveway to make sure that you get those corners. So maybe something to think about how you want to deal with that. Other things to think about, little lawn tractors. These things work actually pretty well. They're not too, they're pretty efficient. They're probably the 80% range because if you set them upright, you don't get them to go up, you get them to spray down. So these little wands here, you can adjust how high and how low you want that water to go. And the idea is to get them as low as possible so that you don't have too much spray up, but it covers a smaller path as it does that because it's not spraying up and over. So what you can do is you take up your hose, which these things will actually just sit there and follow along the hose as it runs along. And so you set your system up so that as it runs, you do a shorter or a narrower path so you actually get much more of your lawn and set it up nice and well for watering. You've got these type of sprinkler heads that you can plug into your hose, and they'll have like, this is a square pattern, this is a little rectangular pattern, and the water will come out in those patterns, which helps when you're talking about square yards or rectangular lawns. You'll end up actually being able to get the corners. The problem with these is that it's spraying a lot finer mist, and so you get a lot more evaporation. So these are down in the 60% efficiency type range. So they work, they cover a lot more area, but they do have issues with how much you're spraying. If you've got a regular irrigation system and sprinkler system for your yard, you'll run into a couple of different types of sprinkler heads that we're looking at. The standard pop-up sprinklers, especially the real cheap ones and the older ones, will look like this. These are horribly inefficient. They're usually running at a high pressure just through a slot, and depending on how high the pressure is on your actual house thing, you could be running into just a fine mist coming out of these things. And that fine mist can evaporate, and you end up with 50% efficiency coming out of that. So half the water that it sprays out never makes it to the lawn and into the root system for your grass. So that's horribly inefficient. A lot more efficient if you're talking pop-up sprayers or with these new rotary style that they've come up with about the last 10 years. They turn that spray slot into a little jet nozzle that'll slowly rotate around, and the nozzle drops are a lot bigger, and so they don't evaporate nearly as much. And so these are probably running about 75% efficiency. Now, when I talk about the efficiency, the thing to think about is that 50% efficiency. Remember that 12,000 gallons I was talking about for the grass needing to grow? Well, 50% efficiency means I need to spray out 24,000 gallons of water to get that 12,000 gallons onto that lawn. And so efficiency when you're talking about our irrigation system can be very helpful. Let's see, was it Jack? Yeah, Jackie was talking a little bit about tuna fish cans or cat food cans when we're talking about doing how much water that we're actually getting out on our lawn. Going through and trying to figure out exactly where the water is going and how much is coming out of the sprinkler heads can be critical on determining if you're getting the right amount of water onto your lawn. You can go by the number of gallons that the pop-up sprayers are actually putting out, but those are, like I said, it depends on what the efficiency is, and that efficiency will actually also fluctuate based on weather conditions. If you're a real dry day when you're watering, you get a lot more evaporation coming out. So it works well to actually go ahead and use the can method. You'll go out and you'll set in your lawn. You'll go ahead and drop a bunch of these cans out in a particular zone. Run the zone for 5, 10, 15 minutes and see how much water is in that can. And that way you know just how long you actually have to run your system to get the exact amount of water that you need for your lawn. Now, when we're looking at how lawn sprinkler systems are put in, one of the things to think about is looking at your lawn system and go, when the guy put it in, did he know what he was doing? And this is an issue. A lot of those that are like, oh, I know how to do PVC, I can just throw together something and I can make my irrigation system real quick and easy, and they'll do this. And what it is they go, my pop-up sprinkler head will spray 5 feet. So they'll go, okay, I need a pop-up sprinkler here, this one will spray 5 feet, this one will spray 5 feet, so I'll put them this far apart. The problem that you run into is that you'll get these little diamonds out there. And I've actually walked across fields, soccer fields or stuff like that, where the guy didn't design them right. And you'd get this beautiful green area, and then you'd have these yellow diamonds where it wasn't getting any water whatsoever. And so you have to remember when people are putting in the irrigation system, or if you're going to try and do something yourself, you've got to make sure that this pop-up sprinkler head sprays far enough to hit this pop-up sprinkler head. If it doesn't, then you're not going to get complete coverage. Okay? It means you got a lot more sprinkler heads, but it also means you get the proper coverage, which is critical. Now, you can also hand water your lawn. A sprayer like this is the best way to do it. That way you can kind of go over, and that way you just kind of walk. It's kind of one of those little mindless tasks to relax after work, watering your lawn. If you're doing it that way, that actually works pretty good because we're looking at a very controlled method. You can determine how much is actually soaking in, and so you can kind of figure out if you need to come back and do a second coat or whatnot to get the correct water amount. The problem that you run into, though, is you're putting in the water and it looks like it's all soaking in, but how much did you actually put onto it? So that may be an issue there. The other thing that you run into with these, a lot of people will just not use the lawn, they'll just use the open hose and just be hosing it down with an open hose. The problem that you usually run into this is you're doing this and go, oh, the timer went off for food, oh, my 4-year-old decided to skin his knee, and so you drop the hose and go, well, I'll get back to this in a few minutes, go handle whatever you did, forget about it, in 30 or 40 minutes come back out, and you've got a river going down your street because your hose has just been dumping water at, 6 or 8 gallons a minute onto your lawn. So, it's best if you can get something that's an automated system that will run when it needs to, and it can put out that correct amount all at one time. You can do drip in your lawn. It's a little bit more involved if you're going to do drip under the lawn. It's usually best if you can do it as a pre-install. So if you're getting ready to do the lawn, you can drop that drip irrigation system in as they sod over it. And that way the water actually goes straight to the root system and you never have to worry about it. The only problem you run into with this is that if you get a leak, it's a little bit harder to find. So that's the one big problem. The other problem that you start running into is when we're running a drip irrigation system like this. If you look at this, and we'll go, say these are like 60-foot lines. Each of the drip emitters, which are usually 1 foot apart, so you'd have 60 emitters in there, will put out 1 gallon of water per hour. Okay, so that's that one line, 60 emitters, is putting out 1 gallon of water per minute to go into that line to get all those 60 emitters. Well, there's 1 gallon, there's another gallon, there's another, there's another, there's another. How much water flow can you actually get through those lines? At some point, you're going to be maxing out what your actual water meter can put through to feed that system. So you need to actually probably break this. If we're looking up to about here, there's 15 lines between here and there. So that would be 15 gallons of water per minute. That's probably more than most water meters can do. All right, so for this area here, I'd probably break that into 4 different zones just to break it down. So not only is the initial upfront cost for the drip installation a little bit more, but you're actually having to do more valves, a control system that can handle all those extra zones. So it does add up for a little bit higher costs up front. And a little bit more in maintenance because your things will break. Yeah.
You also have to realize that that length of tubing has resistance to the water.
Yeah.
So that the front, it gets a lot more than the end.
If you're running this with a correct number of emitters at a time, which is no more than about 300 usually, that water line, the water will actually flow in and then pressurize to the correct amount. So it actually doesn't have too much problem as long as you're keeping the number of emitters at the correct level. There'll be a little bit of pressure difference, but not a whole lot. Yes, ma'am?
Is that the hissing sound I hear when I turn mine on?
The hissing sound is that it clearing all of the air out of the lines and working its way until it's got water through the whole line system, and then it can start working it out. So that's actually one of the ways I find out if it's leaking. A lot of times on mine, because I've got my drip buried under mulch, and so I'll listen to it when I first turn it on, and you'll hear it all the way through, and then it'll stop. And it's like, okay, there isn't any real big leaks, because it sounded about right going through. And so a lot of that's a quick check to see if there's any big leaks going in.
So I've seen this before. They don't get clogged, or what about when you're aerating or anything like that? They don't get damaged?
Aerating is usually not, we've had a couple of lawn specialists come in and they usually don't recommend aerating for the most part. Especially in our clay soil, it sounds like a great thing. The problem is, as soon as you wet the soil, those aerations just immediately clog right back up. So it's kind of one of those things you usually don't want to do. If you were to aerate, it would have a high probability of punching through your lines. Now, clogging, I have not, if you get the good stuff, which I'll talk about here in a second, I have not had a problem with the clogging whatsoever. Don, can you do me a favor? Grab the box right there by my thing and bring it up here for me.
This one?
Yes. So when we're talking about watering our lawn, when should we water our lawn? Well, best bet is early morning. Now, if we're doing things, especially like sprinklers and irrigation systems, that water, the wind, especially right before dawn, is very low usually. That's one of those the very weak points for the lows for the wind system. is right before dawn and right before sunset. So those are the two times we really want to water for that. The other thing is, it's cooler, so we don't lose quite as much to evaporation. Usually it's a little more humid right about that time. So we're trying to get as maximum amount of water onto the lawn and not lose it to evaporation or wind. So early morning, late evening. Now, when we're talking late evening, the one key thing we have to think about, if we want to make sure that we water the lawn early enough in the evening that it can dry out before it hits the real cool part of the evening. Otherwise, we have a chance of getting fungal issues. When we're talking St. Augustine, this can be especially a problem. Okay, so if we water late at night with the St. Augustine grass, the chance of you guys getting fungal issues is pretty high. Now, Jackie was talking about watering it in multiple stages. It depends on how you're watering and what you're watering with. If you're doing drip or sprinkler systems, that sort of stuff. But we usually are still looking for only once a week watering. People always say, "Oh, well, they've cut it down to 2 days a week watering." I'm like, so you should only be watering once a week anyhow. When you water a nice deep soak with that 1 inch of rainfall a week, the idea is that as it builds the soil profile with a nice good water profile into it all the way through the soil, okay? And with that, the top will dry out very quickly, but it'll cause those roots to grow searching for water, which is down a little bit lower, especially if you water deeply. So the idea is if you've got grass, you really want to make sure that it grows deep roots so that if it doesn't get water for a week or two, it's not a problem and it actually has some moisture down underground that it can look for. Trees, like I said, a lot of times, our trees are in our landscape, we've got lawn next to it. A lot of times they're going to get watered at the same time our lawn does. It's not a big problem. But a lot of the things that we deal with are the same time, same amounts usually. But the key thing is, there's two key things to think about. One is when we're looking at it, we need to make sure, based off the species, how much water does that need? Okay, if we're working with a desert willow or a mesquite or a vitex, it doesn't need nearly the amount of water, say, a pecan tree does. Okay, so we want to make sure that we aren't overwatering or underwatering our trees based on the species that we're looking at. The other thing to think about on the species variety, if we're talking about something like a pecan tree may be able to survive off of 3/4 of an inch of rain through most of the year, but it may need 2 inches of rainfall during, say, June. I think that's the right month. Once those nuts start setting on the pecan tree, you want to make sure that that pecan tree has as much water as it needs so you can build up the pecan size. And so not only is species requirement, for general amounts, but also it may be specific on time of year if you need to add extra water for a particular tree. So that may be something to think about, especially with fruit trees and nut trees. The other thing to think about, key critical point on trees, is that you need to water at the drip line. The little bags that you see that you're supposed to buy and hang on your tree to water your tree, those work great when your tree is, this big around. Once that tree starts getting a little bit of a canopy on it, you want to start watering not at the base, but out at what's called the drip line. Think of the drip line as a big umbrella. So all of the leaves on your tree, they're designed to take all of the water that falls on that tree and pull all of the moisture into that one little line right around the edge of the tree. Most of the roots that absorb moisture and nutrients for your tree are going to be right around where the drip line is. Okay? So that's where we need to add any moisture or fertilizer for our trees. Flower beds. Now, flower beds, same basic requirements. Big thing on this also is species. Jackie was talking about doing a beautiful color garden that was both a wet and dry variety plant. So you have to watch out for that. I'll talk about that later. I've got another good example of what can happen if you don't pay attention to that. Always look at what your water requirements are for each of the plants that you're going to be planting in your yard. Now, this is one of my things that I do. My garden here, I used to have Blackfoot daisies right here. I have a single water line to run through here. Now, think about this. All of the plants that I've purchased are very low use water. They don't get watered but maybe once a week, maybe every other week. Just that extra water, I used to have those Blackfoot daisies right there with the water line running next to them. Not through them, just next to them. That was just enough extra water, it killed off the Blackfoot daisies. Everything else loved it, but the Blackfoot daisies were like, no, way too much water, I'm dying. So, something to think about when we're dealing with this. If you've got any water features, fish ponds, little ponds, with just a fountain on it, a fountain, something like that, watering those probably through an automatic system is probably not a good thing. Probably hand watering is going to be the best bet with straight from a hose. You can use floats, especially on ponds and stuff. Just understand that when floats fail, they usually fail in the open position. And so you end up with lots of extra water somewhere that you weren't planning on. So, another thing you can think about with your ponds and stuff, try and shade them as much as possible to prevent water evaporation. Also, if you're looking at something like this, I would put this as the southwest end of the pond because that's the way the wind blows, usually for us, that nice, hot, dry southwest wind. So this little rock wall will help block a little bit of that evaporation going across the pond. So, you build up, plants and, any height that you have on that southwest side to help prevent some extra evaporation. Now, like I said, veggies are one of those things that kind of separate. Highly recommend you do not use a sprinkler irrigation system in your vegetable garden. A lot of plants in the vegetable garden do not like to be wet. Tomatoes are the specifics that everybody tries to grow. If you water a tomato plant from the top, the chances of you getting viruses probably triple. Okay, so you always want to use either hand watering or drip irrigation in your vegetable garden. Okay, now the thing that you'll run into with drip systems, because your soil is so much better usually in your vegetable garden, it drains very well. You may have to water a little more frequently than once a week, and just water less during each time. So, ½ inch twice a week as opposed to 1 inch a week every week. Usually it turns out, believe it or not, most vegetables require about 1 inch of rainfall a week during their productive season. I thought that can't be right. And then I started looking it up. This is how much water their requirements are for each of the different varieties, give or take a little bit. Well, if you start looking at how long it is from the time that they've grown till they start actually producing fruit and that whole fruiting season, it's about that many weeks. And so it actually turns out that most of the, if you're giving your vegetable garden about 1 inch of rainfall a week, it works very well. So, you got your so, now, one of the things Jackie was talking about is how as an earth kind landscaping, we try and plan everything out so that we can make it work well. All right? So, first thing we need to do is actually start looking at our landscape and go, what do we have here? What do we have now? What do we want to have? Always looking at trying to minimize turf as much as possible. This whole garden area that you see here when we bought the house in 2019 was grass. Very sparse, very ugly looking grass because it wasn't getting water very well. And I'm like, no, I'm going to cut out as much of this mowing as I can because I hate to mow. And so I went through and I sprayed Roundup, wiped all the grass out during COVID. That was my COVID project. And I started prepping this bed for, making it into a beautiful native style bed that I didn't have to deal with for the most part. Yes, ma'am?
After spraying, how long did you have to wait before you could plant?
Officially, you only have to wait about a week after Roundup. But because I was spraying Bermuda grass, and any of you know that Bermuda grass is like nearly impossible to kill. I actually spent probably 2 months worth of the summer, as it was growing, making sure to kill off the Bermuda grass. And so I waited until fall. So it was, I waited a couple of weeks just because of, I didn't want to get out there in the August heat. So, but then as soon as it hit the fall, I started planting stuff in. So here's the garden. This is what it was planned out. Some of this has not worked well for what I was planning based off of my own mistakes a lot of time. That lantana confetti, that's how it was supposed to look. Not like how it actually ended up looking, taking over twice as much space. I wanted some roses right behind it. Turns out I'm probably not going to get quite the number of roses that I want. But I'll take the lantana because they're just as pretty. I've got some Turk's cap, various salvias throughout. I've got some nice mums down in the front so that we can have some fall color to add in, something that can take a little bit of the cold. I had some Esperanzas in here. They didn't make it through Snowmageddon, unfortunately, so I've replaced them with other stuff. My Greg's Blue Mist up here, and then I had right here a bunch of daylilies, but that wasn't a real good spot because that's the north side of the house, so they didn't get nearly enough sun. And so I've dug up all the daylilies and pulled them out here, and they're doing beautifully right there. So I went through and I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm going to do for water. I was going to do drip. Like I said, doing drip will probably cut your water bill in an area by about a factor of 3 or 4. Right? Just because you're only watering what you want and you're watering it as most efficiently as possible. So I've got a hose bib here. I've got a 4-way splitter on that hose that I can then control. This was just a quick, I needed to get something in so I could start watering these. I've since switched to an actual controlled system. But this is how I originally did it. And this works well for the average homeowner just to be able to run through. I kind of ran through, figured out each of the beds. I had a separate line there for the roses. And this is my official first draw up of how I was thinking of doing it. Now, like I said, you can do it by hand like I did that one. You can do it, take a screenshot off of Google Earth, and that way you can get all the measurements are exact, and then you can kind of do it along to that. Doesn't matter how you do it, as long as you come up with some sort of a plan that you can at least start with. But me being the engineer and having access to all sorts of play toys, I kind of make mine in 3D and then kind of doodle on it on top of that. As you can see, this is what it looks like, just the irrigation system. The nice part about this is just drawn up in a simple paint program, and so that I could overlay it right across the picture that I had for the whole design plan that I had. And the nice part, I could do these in different colors. It doesn't show up real well on this particular page, but this line, like right here, is a blank line. It doesn't have any drip emitters in it. It's just transport the water from the hose bib over to where I actually wanted the source to actually start watering the flower beds. Yes, ma'am?
So you don't use your rainwater there at all?
I am now.
Uh-huh.
Okay. This was part of the switchover, but this was the initial setup that I had where I was just using city water. I had a separate line for my roses whenever I got a chance to put those in. And you notice I have one here that says to orchard. I put in a small orchard of 15 trees or so. And this is probably about 150 feet out from where this particular hose bib is. And so I had some issues with that too, which I'll talk about in a second. Now, when we're talking drip irrigation, critical item here. Do not use the crap that you get out of the big box stores. It is not nearly as good quality as you'll get from the stuff that you get from an irrigation supply store. There are at least 2 irrigation supply stores that I know of in town. I can't recommend either one of them, but both of them are reasonably decent, have reasonably good selection, so your choice on those. Key things here to think about. You can hook up, if you have a zone in your irrigation system that you want to switch over to drip for like your flower beds, you can go ahead and switch that over. What you'll do is you'll pull your head off for your sprinkler heads, cap all of them off except for one, and then hook into that. You can actually directly hook into, with the correct fittings, into that, and then hook your drip system up to it. The key thing you have to think about there is that the drip systems need to be less than 30 psi pressure to run, otherwise you have a tendency to blow the fittings out. I have at least one or two case studies that people have hooked straight up into the city water system and they keep blowing out their fittings without hooking up to it, without putting a pressure regulator on it. I got some shots here in a second. One key thing on this also, if you have a zone that is, you want to try and switch to drip, you cannot keep your pop-up sprayers and mix it with the drip. Pop-up sprayers do 4 or 5 gallons per minute of water flow. Your drip system runs about 0.05 gallons per minute. Okay, so there's a very large difference there, and so you can't mix and match those two systems. So you have to either go full drip or you have to go with a pop-up system. Your choice on that.
The pump that operates that zone,
Yeah.
you have to put a regulator on it to control the pressure?
Yes. One of the ladies that I worked with who had come to one of my irrigation thing, she was just trying to run her zone for straight off the city water. Worked well up to, for a spray, normal pop-up sprayer, because they need a little bit extra pressure. But since she had to run it down, she capped off all of her lines. The one that she was going to use for the drip system, she took the head off, swapped it out, and we worked out that she took her pressure regulator, screwed that right onto the pop-up for the pop-up sprinkler, the riser, and then she worked from there and ran the drip system. So that the system itself didn't change except at the point where it switched to drip. So. Now when you're talking pumps, if you're doing something like a rainwater harvesting system where you're using a pump to run the system, then yeah. But for the most part you're using city water, you're just using the city water pressure. These are some of the various different parts that you can find. This one here on the lower right, this is the type of one that you will use to switch over from your pressure regulator into your, an irrigation system into your to the drip system. You've got T's, which are very useful for going down and making various branch connections. The elbows you really don't need except in a few particular cases. Usually you can just curve your line as long as it's about a 6-inch radius curve. It's, so something, about like that is about as tight as you really want to be able to get your stuff to curve. These are very handy for 2 reasons. That orchard line that I had was, like I said, it was about 150 feet. The blank tubing runs in about 100-foot rolls. And so I ran out as far as I could, popped one of these in, stuck the next roll on, and continued out from there. And then cut it off when needed. The other problem you'll run into with drip, squirrels tend to love nibbling on the drip lines to, dig up the water. If you do have problems with squirrels in your yard, in general, I would recommend you give them a water source separate, kind of buried up in the under some plants or something a little out of the way, someplace where they feel safe. Let them drink out of that little water bowl, that's fine. Just make sure to keep it somewhat clean so you don't get mosquitoes. But if they have a water source like that, they won't usually eat your drip line, which can be a pain. Shovels can do pretty good damage to your drip lines. Mowers, if you have one that runs a drip line that's running from like here over to there to that flower bed, occasionally you might get it with the lawnmower. So these work well. You just cut the line, stick the 2 together with one of these as a repair one. Hooking up to hose bibs. Hose bibs are a hose thread. Most of the stuff that you'll run into when you're dealing with PVC, which is what your standard sprinkler irrigation system runs, that's what's called natural pipe thread or NPT. They don't fit together perfectly, they'll leak. And so you just got to make sure what you're working with when you're doing it. This actually can hook up directly onto a hose bib. The one problem with that is it's going to be at full water city pressure. So you may have to worry about that a little bit. These do require O-rings to make sure that they seal up nice and tight. Pressure regulator, and then you can get these little valves. They're very handy, especially if you want to build out your whole system, or if you're doing like a vegetable bed, a set of vegetable beds that you're running. Well, this vegetable bed may not be running right now, so you don't want to be watering it, so you can kind of put this valve in and shut it off. They get a little pricey, they're like $5 each for this little teeny piece of plastic, but they're very useful to kind of cut things off when you can. This is what the drip emitters will look like. I've got samples up here. You can come up after I finish talking and we can look at them. They're very well designed. As you can see, hose is usually a 1/2-inch hose. Comes in, they actually cut the hose out, the blank, and then they'll heat weld these emitters in every foot down the line. This is what they look on the bottom. They're actually filtered so that any big chunks of dirt or something floating down the line usually doesn't block up the emitters. If you cut one in half, they've got this nice little plastic piece in it that works to help prevent them from building up calcium buildups. If you look at like a soaker hose or something, you've got all that calcium buildup after a couple of years. This thing flutters nicely as its water's going through it, and it breaks up that calcium buildup. I had some of my drip irrigation system, which I actually stole from my Midland house when I moved, that had been in my Midland house for 5 years and has been here for 5 years and still working fine. The Midland house had, we ran off of well water, unfiltered. It ran a little over 300 parts per million of total dissolved solids. And to give you an idea how bad that was, you could replace a faucet, and in 2 days, you'd have calcium buildup on it. Okay, so that's how fast it would build up with calcium. I've never had one of these emitters fail for calcium buildup in 10 years. So that's how well these things are designed. As you can see, they're actually designed so that the water can flow through without the emitter. If for some reason the emitter was to block up or break, it is not going to stop up the system. The water can flow through down to the next emitter. This is what that hose bib system looked like for when I was having mine set up. As you can see, I've got the main valve to shut off the water, and then each of the splitters has its own individual valve, so I could turn it on and off as needed. I then ran it through. This one was a hose connection down to the NPT connection, which ran directly into that pressure regulator, so that I could immediately reduce that pressure down to where I needed it. From there, it ran off into 2 lines. Each one was valved off, so I could run independently off of those. The second one there, you see there, notice it doesn't have a pressure regulator on it. That was the one that I ran out to my orchard. Being an engineer, I actually did the calculations on this, and it worked out well for what I was looking for. I wanted to, somebody was mentioning that lines will lose pressure over time, or over distance. Well, because it was so far, I was like, well, I don't want to reduce the pressure and then lose more pressure as it goes down. So I put the pressure regulator out in the orchard right before it started branching out, so it was much less of an issue with pressure drop. Turns out the pressure drop from the hose bib to the pressure regulator had it down to where the pressure regulator has never actually operated as a pressure regulator. But that also means I've never had a problem with these fittings popping off. Yes, ma'am?
So the pressure regulator
Yeah.
has a female end that goes into the...
These are both females. Okay. This fitting right here, the black one, or the white one, okay, is going into the black here. So this is a separate fit. This is a threaded connection that has hose connection.
Okay.
This end had the MPT thread to fit into here.
And then your regulator has the MTP thread?
Yeah, it has NPT. This is standard pipe thread that you'll get for PVC.
Okay.
So, the only reason I had to do this is because I wanted it to go straight onto the hose bib, and you can get these fittings in the plumbing supply store when you're looking for fittings. So, just tell them you need to go, tell the people there that you need to go from a hose bib into a pipe thread, and they'll be able to do it. Tell them you're going to PVC, and they'll understand. Yes, ma'am?
2 questions.
Mhm.
On your emitters, are they 6 inch or 12 inches apart?
12 inches apart is standard. They usually either go 12, 18, or 24 inches apart. I recommend the 12 inches.
Okay. The second question is, you don't have a timer on that, that's for manual, but
Yeah.
could you put a timer coming off the faucet? Would
Yeah,
your
yeah.
pressure-
You could put a timer either here or here. It's your choice. The only key problem with, the little timer that we gave away earlier, you could put that in there, set it up so that you could set that time to run whenever you needed to during the week. It would work perfectly for that. The only issue is leaks. A lot of times hose bib connections have a tendency to leak at least a little bit. So if you're leaving it on all the time, you might get, a fair amount of leakage.
Would you be able to run all 4 at one time on that one? On the timer?
Depends on how many emitters you've got, okay? Like I said, you can run about 300 emitters off of any particular one line. But you have to go back to, and that 300 emitters is about 5 gallons per minute.
So you could run it up to 300?
You can do 300 emitters in a single line. Now, the standard pressure regulators are up to 5 gallons per minute. Okay, so that's going to be your limiting factor right there. So that's 300 emitters.
So there's enough pressure to run 4 different lines?
I could probably have run 2 of these at a time without a problem. Like I said, it just depends on how many emitters, and it really gets down to how much pressure you have coming out of your house, how much, like I said, you can run about 300 emitters per pressure reducer. And so if you ran a couple of pressure reducers off of each individual one, my guess is you probably could run 600 emitters at a time off of a single hose bib. Probably no more than that. That's just kind of a guesstimate.
Those 2 hoses over to the left,
Yeah.
those are hoses and then emitters connected to those?
No, those were hoses that I needed for other things.
Okay,
So those were just kind of separate.
okay, thank you.
One key thing I will admit, if you're going to do this as a manual system like this, when you go to turn these on to run your water, start a timer, then turn on your water. And then set it for the 1 hour to run, and then come back when the timer goes off. If your timer goes off and you're doing something and you can't do it, go grab it right then, reset your timer again and start it again to remind you to go shut these off. I had a problem with this, and this is how I've learned. In my vegetable garden, I would have a tendency to turn the water on to water my animals, and it was also running my vegetable garden at the same time. I'd forget to turn off the water after being done watering the animals, and it would run overnight. And it was about 8 inches of rainfall going through my vegetable garden during that night. And it's not only 8 inches of rainfall, it's 8 inches of rainfall over a very large area. And so whenever I would do that, I could watch my water bill spike $75 each time I would forget to turn off the water. So remember to turn off the water. Timers are critical. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I noticed you have a path, a walkway.
Yes.
Did you trench under or go over?
Yes. What I did is I went down. It's a pavement patio, so it's got the sand layer underneath.
Okay.
So I just kind of trenched under that and then made sure it was at least buried somewhat under that and just ran it over. I made sure that anything that went under my patio pavers like that was blank hose so that it didn't get wet underneath and sink in. Yes, sir?
Does placing a water reducer at the end of a pump strains the pump?
A little bit, but not, it's kind of controlling where that pump is actually going to go. Usually when you're looking at a pump, they have what's called a pump curve. So it'll flow so many gallons at so much pressure. And so you're kind of usually, when you're sizing a pump for like a rainwater system, to try and get about, you want to get that right in about the right area anyhow. So if you're going to be using your water system, your pump system from rainwater to do irrigation, you're going to want that curve to be at about 30 psi as a top end anyhow, so that it doesn't ever have to really get pulled down with a pressure regulator.
Regulators come in different PSIs.
Yes.
So you're saying 20 to 30 is okay?
I've run them anywhere from 10 to 30 that work well. Anything over about 30 is when you start getting pressure problems where it starts popping off fittings.
Yep.
One of my problem childs that I fixed.
That's me, I know.
So, if you have a plant, particularly a specimen plant that you want to have a little bit of extra water for, like a rose, because roses usually need about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches of water a week. And so what I like to do is I'll actually ring a rose. That's the nice thing about drip irrigation system. You can kind of meter out exactly how much you want. I'll have a blank line that'll come up to it. I'll feed it into a tee, and then I'll feed 5 or 6 emitters, which will give me roughly a 2-foot diameter circle around that rose bush. Now, if you think about it, that when you do the drip line, you run it for an hour, it will give you a 1-foot diameter circle of water. So you'll end up with like a 1-foot circle in the middle that doesn't actually get water because of that. You know, if you've got a 2-foot diameter circle, it's just kind of a weird thing. But the water profile, when it drips here, it slowly expands as it goes down. So 6 inches underground, you've got water all the way underneath that root system. And so this gets as much water as it needs for running. But then again, I also try and select roses that aren't going to need as much water anyhow.
Is it preferred to keep the tube on top of the ground, or should you bury it a little bit?
Usually what I do is I try and bury it underneath my mulch. Now I usually do 4 to 6 inches of mulch. One of the reasons for that, this isn't a very good picture because it's right next to the rock rose, which is invasive in my yard. Yeah, no, not a good plant. No.
It's a superstar.
Yes, rock roses are great. They don't need any water. The problem is if you get them anywhere near water,
Wildflower of the year.
yeah, they get rather invasive. They're taking over large portions of my garden. For the most part, with my 4 inches of mulch, I don't have to water nearly as much because the ground doesn't dry out because it's got that blanket over top of it to seal it. The other thing about it is I don't have to weed. That huge garden that we're looking at here, that's probably about 1,500 square feet of garden space. Which is, think about it, that's about a quarter of the size of most people's yards. I spend maybe 5 minutes a week weeding that. Okay? My maintenance with that heavy mulch layer is 0, effectively. So it's very nice. The problem is my free-range chickens, which is why that's sitting on top of the mulch. They have kicked it over and it's just kind of sitting on there. So they have a tendency to scratch and dig through a lot of stuff. Another one very similar. Line comes in here. I've got it split out so that it can go around this. And at one point that was supposed to be an Esperanza. As you can see, it's not an Esperanza. It's a Plamacanthus. The Esperanza died in Snowmageddon, and so I got a Esperanza, and it is loving life right there with all that extra water. Phloemacanthus doesn't need any extra water, but if it does have it, it can survive with it. So it does very well. The hummingbirds love my Phloemacanthus too. So, if you've got pots, Jackie was mentioning that you can use drip irrigation into pots. What you usually will end up using is the 1/4-inch drip line to go into it and then have the drip emitters in the pots. Just make sure that if you're going to connect this into, like this one is set up, it actually taps off of my main system that I run once a week for the regular garden. I have to make sure that that drip emitter that I put in there is set to go gallons per hour, not gallons per minute. Because a lot of the drip emitters that you get will put in gallons per minute. And so you might have issues with how much water you're putting out. So what you'll do if you do something like that, you'll take your normal line and you'll take this little tool, which I've got up here, I think. Nice little handy dandy tool. All you have to do is just take it, punch it into the line, gives you a hole that looks similar to that. That's actually an emitter, but it looks about the same size. And you'll be able to take a 1/4-inch drip, get a male-to-male connector, and stick that straight into your drip line, and it actually seals itself up nicely. And you can just then run your 1/4-inch drip line wherever you need. This works really well, especially if you like a whole bunch of hanging plants on your back patio. You can run, the main drip line doing all your garden stuff, and then you can run that 1/4-inch drip line up and drop a dripper into each of your hanging baskets and have them watered all at the same time. This is what they call an inline drip emitter, very similar to the other drip emitters. The difference is this is basically an empty hole through it, and then there's this little teeny hole here that's the emitter. And so it works well if you've got a whole series of them that you're trying to do. If you're doing a pot, a lot of times you'll want one where it's just an end cap type drip emitter. If you're doing vegetable beds or raised beds, something like that, this is one of the areas that you really will use the corners, because you've got squares a lot of times and you're trying to get it in tight. Now, one thing I do recommend if you're doing especially raised bed gardening with vegetables is to double up the spacing. Instead of doing 1 foot apart, I do at least at most 6 inches apart and a lot of times 4 inches apart. The idea is that you're running it for a lot less time, a little bit more frequently, because that water has a tendency in that good soil to drain through faster than you can put in an inch and have it actually stay in that soil. So I'll run it, 2 or 3 times a week, 15 to 20 minutes to make sure that I get the correct amount of water and make sure that it never dries out. 6-inch spacing will work well for your average crop. If you're doing something like onions or garlic, where it's a lot tighter spacing, I'll kind of tighten it up a little bit more, just to make sure. But I have to be careful not to overwater these, especially when I've got that tight of a spacing. And to give you an idea, this is an 8-foot bed with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines in it. That's about 45 gallons of water per hour. So that, it can add up quick when you're adding. Any other questions? All right.
Gas will just let
Yeah. Or at least baffling. I've got a whole selection of piece parts up here. You're free to come up, take a look, handle them, ask me questions. I'll be here for a while, I'm sure. So feel free to come up and ask. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to